Aloha and welcome to this screencast on the anatomy of the Kukui Cup application and some thoughts about the next generation of our underlying framework for the Kukui Cup called Makahiki. What I'm going to do tonight is go through the Kukui Cup web application and identify various user interface components, and then talk about how we might reorganize our underlying framework application to better enable us to create a family of serious games where we can swap in and out various games. The goal here is that if someone hasn't installed meters, it should be very trivial to create a version of the system where there's no meters displayed and none of the dependencies on meters ever appears. Conversely, if someone wants to add a new game, for example, they have access to water readings. It should be possible to define a new kind of plug-in component that defines some kind of game around water usage and create a variant that supports that, that game element. So that's what we want to try to do today. But first, let's start with looking, kind of blasting through the Kukui Cup application. I think this is going to be useful to people who haven't actually played the game to just get the vibe of what's going on. This is all going to be static. I'm not going to click through an actual running application. I just want to show you some screenshots and identify the components that exist. So when you go to the Kukui Cup application, you start on what we call the landing page, and there's essentially two components there. One is a way to separate people who are actually valid players of the game from those who are just interested in the general system. And the second thing is a listing of sponsors. Always important to make your sponsors visible in the application. And then for new players, they go through what we call the first login series of screens. And the first login, when combined with quests, form the onboarding activity. It's very important in games that there be a way that the game teaches you how it is supposed to be played. And so in the Kukui Cup application, we have this combination of kind of an initial login sequence that you see the first time that you go through it, along with this quest mechanism where you can get kind of context-sensitive documentation on various game elements through a variety of quests that are available to you. This is to overcome the problem of, you get to the home page and you go, well, what do I do now? Well, if you have a quest that you can click on, it will guide you through a sequence of activities that lead you to getting points or whatever you want to accomplish. So there's basically 7 screens. I'm not going to go through them in detail, and here they are, but you can see that you start, there's kind of a welcome screen that verifies that you're the player that we think you are. There's the terms and conditions screens. There's a kind of a game component called the referral bonus that appears in this first login. There's a profile customization page. Then there's a introductory video where you have to watch a video, answer a question, and get points for it. And that's a way of kind of teaching you not only what the Kukui Cup is, but teaches you how to play the game, and that you'll be doing things and then getting points for them. And then there's a kind of a final screen which says, okay, you're done with this first login. Look at this quest window next, because that's going to guide you about give you more information about what you might want to do next. Then you go to the home page, and I'm splitting the home page into 3 kinds of components. I'm going to call the first component the Navbar component, which is a lot of different kinds of information. You can see these various links here. Then I'm going to talk. Then there's another component called the quest component. And finally, I'm going to dub the remainder of the page the sitemap component. So here you can see these 3 components. One thing you can see about the Navbar is that in addition to kind of the standard icons to go to various pages, and there's a little scoreboardy summary type thing, there's also dismissible notifications that can appear in the Navbar. So I'm kind of I'm not making the notifications a separate kind of thing. I'm just including them in the Navbar. Maybe that's wrong, I'm not sure, but it seemed a little more convenient. the quest component, and then finally we have these kind of enlarged, this enlarged sitemap that shows you a little bit of information about each of the pages that you could go to. Here's a detail of the quest component. When you click on one of those quest names, it shows you, basically a set of instructions for something you could do within the game, and you can accept the quest. You can say you're not interested in it. Quests don't get you points if you complete them. The system does generally, we do generally design quests so that we can tell when, either by following the quest or just by playing around, you've accomplished the task that the quest is associated with. So the quests kind of disappear when you've already done the activity that it's associated with. And I think we have about a dozen quests right now in the system. I'm not exactly sure. I didn't count them. Okay, so that's the so that takes care of the home page. The next page is the points page. It's called Get Nuts in the Kukui Cup, but I'm going to call it a little more generically a page where you can gain points, which is one of the kind of units of competition. And this has 3 components. One component is going to show you whether or not there's an upcoming event for you to participate in and enable you to enter an attendance code. There's what I call the multi-scoreboard component, which displays rankings that are associated with, generally associated with points. And then there's the Smart Grid Game component, which is a complicated component. It has interior pages. You can click on these links. You can see that in the Smart Grid Game, for those of you who haven't played the Kukui Cup, we have 9 columns. Get started, basic energy, lights out, make watts, moving on, Opala, wet and wild, mixed bag, creative. So that corresponds to, kind of initial concepts, energy, lighting, energy generation, transportation, trash, water, and then a couple, kind of potpourri type columns. And there's 11 rows in here. So there's about over 90 different activities in the current version of the Kukui Cup. Okay, and this, this component is, it can be basically as big or as small as you want it to be. You can see this particular screenshot is someone who's completed almost all of the activities, and which is kind of nice in the sense that you can, if you stare at this long enough, you can start to see the kinds of topics that are being addressed. On the right-hand side, there's a bunch of creative activities that are 50 points that this user didn't do for reasons we don't quite understand. And then there's some locked activities that are signified by the little lock, and actually those indicate squares where there are no actual activities. So we put some permanently locked cells into the Smart Grid game in order to make the Smart Grid game look like a rectangular grid and not have a ragged bottom. And then you can see when you click on any of these are kind of samples of clicking on various cells. And you go to a page that essentially has a left side and a right side. The left side gives some summary information about the activity, and the right-hand side explains what you can do, or if you've already done it, it explains the fact that you've already done it and what happened as a result. So that's the interior of the Smart Grid game, just to give people a flavor for what's going on. The next top level page is called the energy page. It has 3 components. There's a real-time power display component. There's a scoreboard that shows energy related stuff, and then there's another semi-complicated component called the daily energy goal game component. From a user interface point of view, this isn't that complicated, but internally it's kind of complicated because that requires getting decent baseline data for each hour of the day, so that people can see at any particular hour of the day relative to their typical usage whether they're ahead of the goal or behind the goal. And the goal can be set to some arbitrary percentage. We generally had it at 5 or 10% during the Kukui Cup. Then there's a news page. This is intended for communication between people in the lounge or the team members. So I have a team directory component. I'm trying to get away from the use of lounge and talk more generically in terms of teams. There's a news feed. It's kind of like a Facebook wall, but that it's different in that whenever anybody accomplishes an activity and gets awarded points within the Kukui Cup, there's an auto-generated message into the news feed so that people can see what other people are doing. But you can also type stuff into it. We list also popular events in a little scoreboardy type thing, which is intended to help people see kind of what other people do, and then we display what if the player is doing any commitments, which ones they are. The next top level page is the prizes page. This has two components. There's a game that I'm going to call the top score prize game. The idea there is that people who teams or individuals who have the most amount of points according to some scoring system can win a prize. On the right hand side, there's the infamous raffle game that we've probably talked about before, and the idea there is that we want to incentivize people who aren't going to be one of the top scorers. And to do that, every time they get 25 points in the game, they get a raffle ticket. They can allocate that raffle ticket to any one of a number of prizes. There's generally been we had about 20 prizes per round, 20 different prizes per round. And some of them, we awarded the same prize a few times, like T-shirts and stuff. So, but in any given round, there were 20 prizes that were going to be raffled off, and you could at any time allocate your tickets to one or more of these prizes, and you could always see your current odds of winning based upon what other people had allocated, and you could always change your tickets up to the deadline for it. I don't show the complete window here, but at the bottom of the raffle game component window, it explains, when this raffle game is going to kind of close, and and so kind of how long you have to play it. Very, I think, a pretty successful piece of the game. The profile page has, on the left-hand side, a component that allows you to edit your information. There's also a component that shows you badges, your public commitments, and then the My Achievements is essentially a way of documenting how you got all of the points that you actually obtained. So that's a good thing. And if you had any activities that were rejected by you answered a question or did some activity and the administrator didn't award you points for it, then that would show up in this pane as well, and you could click on it to figure out what to do. Here's an example of the badge catalog. Badges were not necessarily the most well-developed part of the game. Frankly, I think we could probably omit them, or we should make them a heck of a lot cooler. The help page, it's very. We had a variety of components. You could see the intro video again. We had some textual thing about the rules, an FAQ. We had an ability to ask an admin. It's questionable to me whether this ever got used. I think one interesting kind of analysis is to see whether this help page was, what happened with it. Anyway, it's pretty easy to provide, and probably for certain players it's nice to have this stuff. Then there's the infamous canopy. This is for the top players after the first 2 weeks in the Kukui Cup. They were invited they were given access to a special page which had more advanced visualizations. This was to solve the problem of not wanting to make energy analyses overly simplistic for everybody, but recognizing that sophisticated analyses were going to freak people out who weren't ready for them yet. So the way we solved it was to have when people started playing the game, they could only see energy data related to their specific lounge or floor. Then after 2 weeks of that, we gave them access to these more advanced kinds of visualizations where they could compare. In particular, either they could see more historical data about their own lounge or floor, or they could compare their data to other lounges. The canopy wasn't used a great deal, and I can talk about that a little bit later about some hypotheses I have about why that happened. But anyway, the notion is that we wanted to provide a way for players to progress within the Kukui Cup and not just stay at kind of the beginner level forever. So let me give a few little bits of feedback about this component analysis. One of the issues that I discovered when kind of documenting this is that we never, unlike the rest of the system where we had kind of concrete games like the smart grid game, the daily energy goal game, the raffle game, and you know, players were basically organized around those three games. There's a couple others, an active participation game. But in this Canopy, there was no sense of a coherent game. There was kind of this loose connection between the analyses and the quests, but it didn't have the conceptual kind of integrity or coherence that existed in the rest of the site. I think that made it more problematic to people. And I think, you know, we made this decision that Canopy users couldn't get awarded regular points. I think that decision can be rethought. I no longer believe that there's any reason not to give regular points within the Canopy. And if we did that, then we could actually integrate Canopy challenges into the smart grid game. And in fact, I no longer see any reason to not just allow the Canopy for everyone. We made a big deal about kind of making it this place that you had to be special in order to get into. We could continue to do that. This is something I'd like to talk to the freshmen about. Or we could just, after the third week, say, oh, there's this additional page for those who want, and let people self-select whether they like the Canopy. And finally, I think that if we go that direction, we should just have a regular icon that appears in the system to enable you to get to the Canopy when it's available to you. There's also this interesting thing that I discovered about pages and the ability to lock them. So the Canopy is an example of a page that gets unlocked, is locked for everyone for a while, and then gets unlocked for certain people. I think we can make that mechanism kind of general so that other people making games could lock and unlock arbitrary pages, and that could provide some interesting flexibility in terms of alternative games for different people, or 3 or 4 different levels that people can, or a progression of pages that people could go through. We could also get the admin interface implemented this way, which I think would be useful. The next thought I have is that there's this concept in user interface design these days called responsive user interfaces. The notion is if you're using HTML5, with HTML5 you can have the browser detect what the width of the screen is that your device has, and so it can tell, is the browser being displayed on a laptop, or is it being displayed on a tablet or on a smartphone. And then the display of the information on the page can be dynamically reformatted to suit the display medium. Okay, and this gets around the idea that you have to build a native iPhone app, and then a native Android app, and then a native tablet app, and then a laptop app, or a regular laptop thing. You can have kind of one set of code that fits all of these. I'd like to see us go to this approach for this the second version of Makahiki and thus Kukui Cup, because I think that it can make the system tremendously more interesting and effective if people have a nice way of interacting with the system regardless of the platform that they're on. This is going to lead to some changes in the kind of the presentation. We had this kind of foresty theme. Some people liked it, some people didn't like it. I think when you go to responsive UI, generally people go to a much simpler kind of background format, and I think that will be just fine in the Kukui Cup. I don't think that people really need flowers and so forth. And finally, I have some undergraduates that are signed up to do an independent study with me in the spring 2012, and I'm thinking of unleashing them on this particular problem and see if they can build some mock-ups that we can use. Then in terms of game analysis, I'm quite curious, having gone through this, about where and when and why people use the quest mechanism. Are there quests that never got used? Are there quests that can we somehow figure out that we should have provided some quests that we didn't? I'm curious about the help page. Did it get used? When did it get used? How many, who used it, and so forth. And I'm also curious about the news feed. So I'd like to see some analysis of that happen in the near future, because that can also be really helpful to us for the design of the second generation. Okay, so that concludes my whirlwind tour of the Kukui Cup application. For those of you who just are interested in kind of an overview of Kukui Cup, you can probably stop watching now. I'm going to now kind of delve into, into Geekland, where I want to discuss the Makahiki 2 framework, or my idea about it, and have people be thinking about that, and we can have a discussion on that this week. The notion here is that we want a flexible, extensible framework for creating Kukui Cup style serious games. Okay, so what does that mean? When I went through the Kukui Cup system, I came up with the following 8 kind of objects or classes. And so what I'm going to say is that, at least at a first pass, I'm thinking that we could design the Makahiki 2 framework as being composed of at least these 8 primary classes. And then when you want to create any particular serious game, such as the Kukui Cup, or for other schools or universities, what you'll do is you'll create instances of these classes and combine them in various ways, and that would result in either something that looks very much like the current Kukui Cup system, or looks like a simplified version of the Kukui Cup system, or looks like maybe a more complicated version of Kukui Cup, where you're adding in recycling games or water games, or what have you games. Okay, so let's see how this works. I'm going to start with a player. We definitely want the entity of a player entity within the system. That's kind of obvious. When I'm thinking about it, though, they don't hold internal state about the game in them. It's more just like their profile level information. It's actually the game components that hold state about players, rather than players holding information about state. It's maybe somewhat arbitrary, but that was kind of my aesthetic about it. Then we need a component that organizes players together into teams. I'm thinking that whereas I thought about this for a while. I mean, you could certainly have a competition where you don't have the notion of teams. On the other hand, all the kind of uses that I'm seeing have the notion of teams. Because we're using residence halls or classrooms or departments or whatever. So I think, at least for Makahiki 2, if we can simplify our lives a fair amount, if we just say that there are players, and players have to be organized into teams in order to do that. That doesn't seem to limit us for any of our near-term uses of the system. I think it makes the architecture a little simpler, and then later on, if we need to relax that constraint, we can see what that would mean. You can always say every player is its own team, if you really needed to work around that. Then we have this notion that I'm going to call the score system. And the idea is that in the Kukui Cup, we have a few different kinds of metrics that we use to rank people or lounges. We have the point system, which you can use to rank people, and people get points by doing activities within the smart grid game. We have kilowatt hours as a metric, and people use energy within their floor to to get a value of that metric. We have the number of times that people met their daily energy goal. So daily energy goals is a metric. And then when they go into the canopy, they get awarded something we call karma for doing something good, accomplishing something in the canopy. So in fact, in the current Kukui Cup, there's at least 4 different metrics. Actually, there's a fifth one, which is active participation, now that I think about it. But anyway, the point is that you need a kind of the ability to define an arbitrary number of metrics for ranking people and teams. And so the score system is designed to do that. You can query a score system to ask what the current value of that metric is for a given player or for a given team. You can also get a ranking of them, and I'm also thinking that you can that this will also provide, if Jane Doe has 50 points, you can ask the score system, well, how did she get that 50 points? And then the score system will return some kind of record of how those 50 points were obtained. The next framework class is called the awards class, because it's pretty common, though it doesn't always happen, that people will be awarded prizes or something, some kind of incentive for doing the best. And this could be kind of folded into the score system. I'm not completely sure, but it seems at the moment to be kind of to be better as a standalone component. Then we have the most kind of complicated framework class, which I'm calling gamelets, kind of taking off on portlets or servlets. And the notion is that this provides a user experience, in the Kukui Cup as it stands now. Gamelet instances of the gamelets would be, or the gamelet class would be used to implement things like the smart grid game, the raffle game, the quest engine, the daily energy goal game, the power meter, the badge game, the news feed, competition rules, FAQ, ask an admin, and top score prize game. So all of these user experiences, regardless of whether they're really a game or not, they're going to be built within this gamelet class. And I call it a user experience component because there might be multiple user interface elements that are associated with it. So for example, in the smart grid game, you have that top level, kind of Jeopardy grid thing, and then you have all the interior pages. Okay, so a single gamelet, the gamelet that implements the smart grid game would have, a lot of different, several different pages associated with it. Also, you can, for certain of these activities, for example, the smart grid game, you have to define the content that goes in the smart grid game. And that requires basically an administrator interface, and that would also be implemented within this class. Okay, and that's something that I want the current Python hackers to think hard about, because we were using Django admin interface for this in Kukui Cup 1.0, Makahiki 1, and I'm kind of suggesting this alternative approach. I don't know whether it's better or worse. Something to think about. Okay, so a gamelet will typically maintain internal state. So, for example, the smart grid game gamelet would be able to say for any given player what how to draw the Jeopardy board and so forth. Okay, and of course there's going to be a close relationship between a gamelet and a score a score system. It's not a one-to-one correspondence, because, for example, the daily energy goal game will also result in points being added to a score system in the smart grid game also, so that you can have many different gamelets all altering or all interacting with a single score system. The page class, this is just the regular fundamental UI element, as I said before, I want them to be responsive. I'm hoping they'll be responsive. Use HTML5. Have some access control to see whether or not a player can actually do it, and then individual gamelets would generally contribute to the content of a page class at kind of system definition time by creating, saying this div element should be in there, and this is a complicated thing. How this all works out, we're just going to have to further develop it. But that's the kind of the top level idea. I also have this class called Round Info. In the Kukui Cup, we had round 1, round 2, and then we had this final round which spanned the entire extent of the game. I think that's a pretty common and useful way of organizing a competition. It's good in the sense that when you have multiple rounds and you kind of restart from, in some sense, 0 at the end of the first round, it gives people who didn't get engaged in the first round an opportunity to jump in and start using it. So it really has some strategic advantages as a game mechanic. So I'm making that kind of a first-class citizen in this framework. Then we want to have some top-level class which kind of organizes together all of these other classes to create an actual serious game. I'm calling that the challenge class. It's a singleton in the sense that, in any given running Makahiki server, there should only be one challenge instance. As I write that, I think to myself, shoots, why not have, if we could completely encapsulate everything within the challenge class, there's no reason why we couldn't have one Makahiki server that runs multiple games. What the heck, why not? That's kind of an interesting idea, something to think about. And why not? I don't see really any, I don't really see any reason why you couldn't do that. So the it's going to combine together class instances from all the different framework components, and then you execute. In some sense, the underlying game engine is going to execute this defined challenge class to actually, run the Kukui Cup. Okay, how is this challenge? How do you define a challenge? I'm assuming that there's going to be a Python. It's just going to be a bunch of Python code which, adds objects, creates objects and adds them to a dictionary or, whatever. I'm not worried about any kind of, declarative syntax for this thing at this point in time, unless someone really, it wets their whistle to do it. I don't expect, a non-savvy Python programmer to be actually able to define a serious game without being able to do some programming and understanding the framework. Okay, so that's that I want to make that clear. What I do want, though, is I want to make it dramatically easier for people to create variants of the Kukui Cup to satisfy different kinds of needs, particularly if they want, just a certain portion of the Kukui Cup. That should be, a couple hours or something worth of effort to, to define that subset of the game. And then I also want the ability to, without a huge amount of effort, and in a kind of modular way, if someone wants to say, listen, I just want this extra game in the system. I'm going to have a water game. We should make it, the framework should make it easy for someone to sit down and write the Python code to define one of these new gamelet things, and then that becomes available as part of the library of the palette of things that can be provided, and we can throw it in there. And the current framework doesn't, it's very monolithic at this point, and I don't have any problems with that. As we were designing this thing from the ground up, and it's exactly perfect for its intended purpose, and it's only because we have this experience using it and that it works so well that we can now kind of raise the abstraction level one. So I'm thinking that that basically we're going to define a program, we're going to define a family of different Kukui Cup style serious games through this mechanism. Okay, so what does the underlying game engine provide? And so the notion is that the services that the framework provides is these definitions of the framework classes like players, teams, challenge, round info, etc. It will provide persistency, it'll provide caching, it'll provide instrumentation and logging, UI event notifications for gamelets. So you can imagine that the smart grid game might potentially want to know when the user does something in the in the news page, maybe, so we should have some kind of notification mechanism, so that gamelet instances aren't dependent only on their own user interface elements to find out what's going on and react to the system's the player's behavior. There should be some pages that the game engine provides kind of for free, like the landing page, the home page, the first login sequence. Those should be configurable. And then there should also be some UI elements like the Navbar, the quest engine, FAQ rules, which are provided kind of for free as part of the underlying game engine, but of course can be configured. Okay, and then I'm thinking we have this kind of library of things that you define using those concepts that I had. If we wanted to recreate the Kukui Cup using Makahiki 2, this new version, so we'd have a gamelet for the smart grid game, the raffle game, daily energy goals, social bonus, referral bonus, and canopy. Okay, so hopefully that kind of gives you a sense, or at least a way to start thinking about this. I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's wrong. I'm sure it's wrong in certain ways. I don't know if it's right in any way, but I wanted to make this proposal to start George and Yongwen actually thinking hard about how we might do this. So I'm thinking in terms of next year, the Kukui Cup game, the game mechanics system should be pretty similar. Hopefully the canopy will be improved. Maybe we'll have some new games. Definitely would like to see a responsive user interface. HPU, they've got different kinds of players, different teams, different login mechanism. They may want to have a water game. I kind of forget, but they may want to select some different kinds of games. The East-West Center is interested in doing a Kukui Cup, but they definitely don't have any energy meters, so we'd have to take out that. And then when we start thinking about in the elementary schools, I put Manoa Elementary here, but that's not right. It's some other elementary school, I think, on the Big Island. There, I'm not quite sure if they have meters, or if they do, they're not probably IP addressable. And in addition, even the content of the smart grid game would have to be altered a lot for that user group. So I think though that if we kind of can decompose things into this framework and build it back up, we can essentially satisfy these 4 different communities with Makahiki 2, and in so doing, I think we would prove that we've got a fairly flexible framework. Finally, my challenge is, can we by the end of January implement an alpha version of the framework with the most minimal game possible, just a landing page, a home page, and a single energy page, and we can have a really simple user interface. It doesn't have to be responsive or anything, but I'm just trying to, I think that we need to try coding this stuff up to see where the problems exist in this architecture, and building the simplest possible game and doing it quickly, I think, would be a good way to get there. Okay, thanks a lot.